What made you quit a job on the spot? Nothing dramatic. After working my butt off during the pandemic and promised an additional bonus, I received a low performance review, conveniently timed a day before my bonus was to be paid. The low performance feedback cancelled my bonus. Given all the other BS I was putting up with, I broke and quit. I have a nice month off and my new job pays significantly more. Never work for people that don't appreciate you. There are always others that will. That's right, we're back with more job quitting stories. I feel like we've done this quite a few times, but it's always nice to have more. I used to cut grass in a cemetery. I used a push lawnmower and had to lift it up onto elevated graves, and then put it back down onto the next one. Over and over and over. Minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. After an hour of cutting grass in the August heat, I sit down for my break, and this guy named Leroy asks, "Was that worth $4.25 to you?" I quit the next day. Thanks, Leroy. This must have been quite a long time ago because the minimum wage hasn't been $4.25 in a while. But I mean, even when I was mowing lawns last year, getting paid like $14 an hour, I was like, I don't even think this is worth it. Asked for a raise and was told okay. The next morning was Friday, and I was told by the same person who agreed with the raise that I should put a few more years in, and then we'll talk again. Locked my toolbox at the end of the day and called a tow truck to pick it up. The shop manager was shocked that next Monday to find an empty spot where my tools were, and couldn't understand why I left. See, I think that a lot more people should try something like this. I mean, employment is a two-way contract, so if you're giving them your all, but you don't feel like they're giving you much in return, then you might just want to find somewhere else. My grandfather, who I considered like a father, passed away after a long stay in a hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day off for his funeral, since I was organizing part of the arrangements and having a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral finally comes and the staff starts calling me, leaving me messages asking why I'm not at my shift, and telling me, while I'm in a suit hosting family members at a funeral home, that I have to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out, and never looked back. You know, a lot of these kind of remind me just of those old pro-revenge stories. Maybe that's why I feel like I've done this topic so much. I walked into the interview, everything went well, accepted the job offer, went to the front desk to do the paperwork, and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount, and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 a week. I asked first about the amount difference, and was told, "Oh, this is the standard contract. It just hasn't been updated for your specific offer." I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. "Oh, that's not how things work here." I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to have started, asking where I was. I told them because I didn't sign the contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. Wow, so apparently you never needed to sign anything to become an employee, because apparently they put you on the shift anyway, even though you skipped all the paperwork. But to be honest, I've had a lot of instances like that too, like even recently, where I go to a job interview thinking like, alright, this job seems kinda cool, but then after finding out more of the details and negotiating, I'm just like, alright, I'm out of here. Yeah, I don't want to work here. I mean, it's better to stop then than to work for a week and then quit, I would say. I worked for a privately owned bakery for exactly 1 week. The owner's son comes in, walks past the counter and into the bathroom. He comes out a few minutes later without acknowledging me or my coworker, gets into his car and drives away. We both looked at each other, then opened the door, only to find this guy literally pooped all over the toilet seat and the toilet paper holder. I called the owner, told her what happened, and she said to deal with it. So I asked my coworker if he wanted to clean it up, because I wasn't going to. She declined, and I told her I was walking out. She did as well. We locked up the store and told the owner we quit, but would reconsider staying if her son came back to clean up his own mess. She yelled and berated us for 20 seconds before I said goodbye and hung up. I mean, literally just barely before I read that story, I said it's better to not take the job than to quit after 1 week. And then immediately after that, there's a story about someone who quits after a week. But I would say that this instance is a little bit different than what I meant. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman where I work. I work underground, and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual, starting working after a few weeks, decided that it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground, and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give him 2 weeks' notice, and without missing a beat, the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks, you're going to notice that I'm not here." Turned around, packed his stuff, and left. Was never heard from again. Hey, that's a pretty good one. I might try to use that one day. I mean, I kind of understand why employers do the whole 2-week notice thing, because they're like, we need time to find a new person to replace you. But at the same time, it's like, do you really want to keep around an employee who everyone knows, including them, that they're on their way out, who has nothing left to lose at this point, who doesn't have to work hard, who can really just exploit things if they want to. The one time I've ever been fired, they didn't even let me finish out the shift, let alone 2 weeks, so I think that this logic can really go either way. I worked for a T-Mobile store as an authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. One week, I had an amazing week. I sold 55 phones, brand new activations on business account with 55 high-end phones at the time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order, and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all the paperwork in case this happens so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office and they told me that it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collectors, and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees, and eventually led to an investigation by the government. According to an old coworker I bumped into years later. Well, so it turns out that you can't just get away with saving money by never paying employees. Turns out that's gonna come back to bite you pretty quickly. But see, this is something that I really have an issue with whenever there's a bunch of activists that like to go out and march in the streets because I need to get paid more, or something like women don't get paid as much as men. It's like, take it up with your boss. What are you doing marching in the streets for? If you know for a fact that you are being treated unfairly, just go to your boss and threaten to sue them if they don't fix it. Like, what is the point of marching in the street? It's already illegal to do that kind of stuff, so I don't see what that's supposed to accomplish. I worked as a cashier in a local shop. One night, 2 guys came at me with knives trying to get in the till. I just walked away and said have at it, as it wasn't worth the minimum wage to get into it with a couple guys waving knives at me. After they ran out of the store, I picked up my mobile and called the police, then called the store manager. The next day, the district manager meets me as I turn up for my shift the very next day. Her first words were, "It was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while in work." I laughed at her and told her she could take this as my notice and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up, but the sheer gall of that got me. You gotta love these NPC type people when they're in management. It's like, how could you call the cops? You were really using your phone while at work. You're breaking the rules. It's like there's no sign of any common sense left in them. I got mugged on a delivery for Domino's and came back to the shop crying and panicked. Had my phone, wallet, and pizza taken. Told my manager what happened. They said, "Are you hurt?" I said, "No, but I lost my phone and wallet. I need to call the police." They said, "No time for that. Here's your next delivery." It was like 2 blocks from where I just got mugged. I went home. The police never really did much to get my phone and wallet back. Not like they could. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you couldn't even legally do any more deliveries that night if your driver's license was stolen. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy with a small fries and drinks for our lunch break. One day when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I was asking for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of the customers and my coworkers. I couldn't believe it. This grown-up, successful businessman was hounding a 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. I told him I wasn't gonna pay, put the food down and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend. I told them no thanks and never went back. All this over just one measly piece of cheese. Well, the manager probably had a much more expensive time trying to hire somebody new than he would have lost on that one slice. Lol, I had an inside hint from HR that there were about to be mass layoffs, and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation, and returning the day before layoffs were presumed to have happened. My boss reamed me out for daring to take a vacation. She said I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in a project to take a vacation. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on vacation before project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for the week I was away anyways, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was mad and said that she was just upset with me for having left and made her take care of my project for me. Chewed me out in front of the entire company in the conference room. I chilled and was like, "Aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so I can collect unemployment." The entire room literally starts panicking, and management tries to understand how the heck I knew about layoffs. It was my one true Regina George causing chaos moment in my life. Hey, now there's a good way to go out in style. Especially if it's a company that doesn't pay you out all of your extra leftover vacation days. I worked for a restaurant/pub. The owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time, a lot of times forcing the bartender to stay way past close serving them. Obviously was told not to charge anything because it's the owner's party. After hours of drinking on the house, no tip. Not even from the owner. This started to happen frequently. Usually we'd put up with it if they'd leave or be done before close. Then he started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were being paid because we made like $4 an hour, but the kitchen wasn't a tipped kitchen and made a decent wage. Turns out the owner was a total drunk idiot, which should have been obvious, and buried himself in debt. A week later, we were told our checks weren't there on the day that they were supposed to be. Then 2 days later, still no checks. I told them if my check wasn't there tomorrow, I won't come in for my shift. They said it came. I got there, and they said, well, what I meant was it's actually on the way. I talked to the... and I walked out. I later found out no checks were ever issued there again. They tried to pay some people cash, but it fell apart very soon after. Yeah, I guess it's probably a good idea to make sure that the company you're working for is actually making money before you put so much time into it. I worked at Walmart for a short time. I worked as hard as I possibly could to unload their pallets of merchandise. I always thought I was so fast. I studied the process and I believed I perfected it. Every single day my manager came up to me and told me that I needed to be faster. So I did, and the fast pace made me lose a little focus, causing me to break a finger. I let management know that I might be a little slower due to my injury, and they straight up told me, "We won't tolerate any laziness," and wrote me up when I didn't meet their ridiculous standards. So I went home after my shift, and never returned. Never called, never formally quit, just never came back. Screw Walmart. Like, I'm sure that working at Walmart is probably about the same as a lot of places, but there's something about telling somebody, yeah, I work at Walmart, that I can imagine just feels so painful. I was at a company for about a year and a half as an assistant project manager. In that year and a half, I had 3 different bosses, the newest one being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20% below the standard salary for the position, overworked without any additional compensation, and the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day. I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming, and I just cut her off and said, "I'm not doing this crap anymore, I quit." She yelled back, "Well, I need it in writing." And I said back with the straightest face, "I don't have to do crap in writing." I quietly packed all my stuff up, said good luck to my coworkers, and left. A year later, after working a couple of other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and made almost twice as much as I was making at the previous. And I get to post on Reddit while at work without getting yelled at. Man, it's so weird. There's so many companies out there that have these like strict standards and rules that you have to follow when quitting. But it's like, why? What are they going to do if you don't? I guess they might be a bad reference in the future if you ever want to include that, but it's kind of silly to be making demands for somebody who's leaving you. I had a job about 10 years ago doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage plus bonuses you earned for selling people stuff. And by stuff, I mean terrible, overpriced services that you can get online for free. I was still in the phase of training where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls, and after a call, he told me I should have paused to try and sell him some crappy antivirus service before I fixed his problem. Handed in my headset right there. Felt so skeevy when people call you for help and you have to turn into a telemarketer. You ever notice that so many jobs that involve sales involve you having to sell the worst garbage? 'Cause like, things that are actually good usually just sell themselves. So I feel like getting into a salesman job is usually a trap. Because oftentimes you basically just are a scammer. I worked at a certain children's entertainment place known for having birthday parties with pizza and a rat mascot. I was a party hostess. Little boy, probably 7 or so, took a really long time to blow out his candles, so I leaned in. He was making his wish for a man to stop touching him. I immediately went to my manager with it. He told me that I couldn't do anything with this information. At the time, I wanted to discuss it with the mother. So I quit on the spot and reported it to the police. I have no idea if anything came of it. Wait, so as an employee, you're not allowed to report this to the police. So it's like, okay, I guess I'm not an employee anymore. Time to report this. Going to the toilet pre-meeting to negotiate a raise, I heard both directors of the company, in a small firm, everything ran through them, talking outside the window that they were going to flat out refuse any offers and make the a-hole work overtime to prove his loyalty. And he has no prospects anyway. Where will he go? I entered the meeting with my signed and printed resignation in hand, slapped it on the table after sitting down, and stood straight back up saying, "Meeting over." Man, it's so crazy how the tiniest bit of information can change your whole prospect on some people. Well, I hope this video has inspired somebody to quit their terrible job. But really when it comes down to it, if you're being taken advantage of when you're at work, and you can tell that you're being underpaid and overworked, and your boss feels like they can get away with it because you're not going to do anything about it, it's basically the same thing as if you were like in school and you're just getting picked on and you're not standing up to a bully. So I think that if more people just grew a spine, then everybody would just be in a better spot. But anyways, that's all for today. I'll see you next time.